Imagine gliding into a world where classic Italian aristocracy meets the fast pace of global industry, where the hum of Fiat engines mingles with the rustle of couture gowns, and where lavish dinners under ancient frescoes share space with jet-setting weekends in Morocco. This is the world of Marella Agnelli, born Marella Caracciolo di Castagneto, a woman once hailed as one of the most elegant figures on the planet. She was a photographer, a garden designer, a muse to haute couture, and one of Truman Capote's famed Swans. Yet behind the glow of magazine covers and the hush of gilded salons lay a life punctured by scandal, heartbreak, and the enduring challenge of crafting a personal identity in the epic shadow of her husband's unstoppable orbit. Marella's story begins on May 4th, 1927, in Florence, Italy, arguably one of the world's most romantic and art-drenched cities. Her father, Filippo Caracciolo, was a Neapolitan prince and a liberal intellectual. In earlier centuries, that title would have signaled unquestioned power and feudal holdings. But by the 20th century, princely status in Italy was more a patina of old-world prestige than a guaranteed seat of authority. Nonetheless, Filippo was well respected, a figure who navigated Europe's political uncertainties with both an aristocrat's confidence and a reformist's fervor. Marella's mother, Margaret Clark, hailed from Peoria, Illinois, an American with a different cultural background altogether. Thus, from birth, Marella straddled two worlds, the ancient lineages of Italy and the new horizons of American possibility. She grew up with two brothers, Carlo and Nicola, in a refined multilingual household where Italian, English, and French intermingled, and the conversation at dinner might pivot seamlessly from Renaissance art to modern politics. In her teenage years, she spent time in Paris studying at the Académie Julian, a famed art school once frequented by legendary talents. She absorbed not just technical skills in sketching, painting, and photography, but also the bohemian ethos of mid-century Paris, where surrealist exhibits could be found down the street from haute couture ateliers. This artistic education was more than a finishing school flourish. It set the stage for her lifelong engagement with visual beauty, a passion that would later define her as a designer of gardens, as a collector of art, and even as a photographer who served briefly as an assistant to the brilliant and famously idiosyncratic Irving Blumenfeld in New York. During that sojourn in the United States, she occasionally modeled for Vogue, stepping in front of cameras that typically reserved their lenses for the era's top luminaries. But if Marella's father and mother imagined their daughter forging an independent path in the arts, fate had other plans, or perhaps it was society that had other plans. In the glittering post-war world, she crossed paths with Gianni Agnelli, the scion of the Agnelli family, whose fortunes were bound to Fiat, Italy's largest car manufacturer, and an industrial behemoth with global reach. Gianni, often just called l'avvocato, the lawyer, by Italians, was known for his playboy ways, his dynamic leadership of Fiat, and his seemingly endless appetite for adventure, glamour, and beautiful women. He was that figure who made headlines for zipping across the Riviera in a yacht one day and forging major international business deals the next. To be near Gianni was to be near a center of gravity so intense that it could pull entire orbits of wealth, power, and fame around it. Marella, with her refined aura and aristocratic heritage, provided a magnetic counterpart. They wed on November 19, 1953, at the Osthoffen Castle in France, in a ceremony that practically defined the phrase, society wedding. If the tabloids had existed in today's form, they would have reveled in the idea of an Italian princess marrying the handsome industrial titan. The merger of Caracciolo pedigree with Agnelli Empire was a fairy tale for the era. From that point on, Marella's life glimmered under a global spotlight. She was an ambassador of style for Italy, recognized for her impeccable taste in clothing and interior design. She would host parties in the grand Agnelli residences, including the sprawling Via Perosa near Turin, a gift from Gianni's grandfather, a wintry chalet in St. Moritz, and a fabled home called Ain Kasimu in Marrakesh, where palm trees and North African decorative motifs fused with her own European aesthetic. She collaborated with star architects like Gaia Lenti, shaping spaces that were at once aristocratic in their formality and modern in their approach. The couple had 2 children, Eduardo, born in 1954, and Margherita, born in 1955. On the surface, the Agnelli family seemed to have it all: wealth, prestige, fashionable acclaim. Marella embodied the role of a hostess who navigated cultural labyrinths with grace, as comfortable at a European diplomatic function as she was at a bohemian arts gathering. And yet, behind that polished facade, the marriage was never truly calm. Gianni's extramarital affairs became the stuff of legend. He romanced Hollywood starlets like Anita Ekberg and Rita Hayworth, socialites like Pamela Churchill Harriman, and, as rumor had it, perhaps even Jacqueline Kennedy. After JFK's assassination, Jackie's rumored ties with Gianni made persistent headlines. For Marella, these were not trivial flings. Gianni's serial infidelity forced her into an impossible role, the wife who must appear unfazed, not least because the fortune, reputation, and unity of the family enterprise demanded it. One of the earliest and most excruciating episodes of betrayal surfaced while Marella was pregnant with their first child, Eduardo. Gianni's fling with Laudomia Hercolani, a recognized aristocrat from Bologna, escalated to a point that Marella, in anguish, fled to Argentina in 1954, accompanied by Gianni's sister Suni. She contemplated a permanent separation, outraged by her husband's cavalier disregard for her pregnancy and her feelings. Family pressures, though, both from the Caracciolo's and the Agnellis, ultimately pushed her to reconcile. In a culture where male indiscretions were often rationalized as normal expressions of virility, Marella was expected to overlook such humiliations. Over time, she developed a coping mechanism that was less about acceptance and more about resignation. She confided to close friends he needed conquests, as if summarizing an ancient tradition of male aristocrats, but that stoic facade could not entirely mask her pain. Even as Marella navigated personal heartbreak, she continued to shine in public. In 1963, she was inducted into the International Best Dressed List Hall of Fame, a testament to her iconic style that seemed equal parts Italian aristocrat, modern sophisticate, and bohemian creative. Truman Capote, the flamboyant American writer with a keen eye for society glamour, dubbed her one of his swans, a small circle of wealthy, beautiful, and impeccably groomed women who moved through rarefied social spaces on both sides of the Atlantic. Capote was enthralled by Marella's serene composure, her elongated silhouette, and her artistry in assembling a look that was never fussy but always striking. If Babe Paley embodied a brisk American Polish and Slim Keith represented a West Coast casual chic, Marella personified a certain European timelessness, regal but never stiff, refined yet warm. Yet in time, Capote would betray this circle in a dramatic act that placed Marella in the crosshairs. In 1975, Esquire magazine published an excerpt from Capote's then unfinished novel, Answered Prayers, titled La Côte Basque, 1965. It spilled thinly veiled secrets and lurid gossip about Capote's high society friends, stories gleaned from intimate conversations they had assumed were safe. Some of the vignettes centered on extramarital affairs, hidden resentments, and the kind of personal confessions one might only share with a close confidant. While Marella herself was not explicitly named, her social circle was implicated in ways that made it obvious who Capote was referencing. This public betrayal severed her once cherished bond with the writer. She withdrew her trust from him, a quiet finality that left Capote bereft of one of his most elegant muses. Though not as cataclysmic as other tragedies in her life, the wounds from that literary ambush lingered, making her all the more wary of outsiders. If the heartbreak of Gianni's affairs and Capote's betrayal were not enough, Marella faced tragedies of a far deeper and more personal nature. The most crushing blow, by all accounts, was the death of her son, Eduardo, in 2000. Eduardo had been born into privilege but never embraced the corporate or social demands that came with the Agnelli name. While Gianni hoped Eduardo might become a key figure in Fiat's future, the young man found solace in Eastern philosophy, converting to Islam, spending time in India, and adopting an ascetic lifestyle at odds with the glossy European jet set. Father and son drifted apart. Gianni effectively shifted his hopes to a nephew, Giovanni Alberto Agnelli, grooming him instead as the next empire builder. This left Eduardo feeling sidelined, cut off from a sense of purpose. He wrestled with depression and drug issues, and the weight of the Agnelli legacy became oppressive rather than inspiring. On November 15, 2000, Eduardo drove his Fiat Croma to a viaduct near Fossano, not far from Turin, parked, and jumped to his death. The fall was around 80 meters, mortally final. Marella rushed to the scene with Gianni as police recovered the broken body. Eduardo was so disfigured that his mother could only identify him by his clothing. He was just 46. The emotional toll on Marella was incalculable. Friends observed that though she managed to hold herself with composure at the funeral, placing her son in the family vault at Villar Perosa, she was never the same. It is said that from that day on, a new gravity appeared in her eyes, her typical serenity overshadowed by heartbreak. Her relationship with Gianni was already fraught, but the shared loss of Eduardo bound them in grief. When Gianni himself died 3 years later, in 2003, after a struggle with prostate cancer, Marella must have felt yet another jagged piece of her life pulled away. She was 76 at the time of Gianni's death, enough maturity and experience to have encountered every shape of heartbreak, from the betrayal of a friend to the suicide of her child. She arranged her husband's funeral in Turin, overseeing details with the same unflinching style that had long impressed the world. Mourners from Europe's political and business elite attended, a testament to the brand Gianni had built and the society they inhabited. Marella, hands shaking as she arranged lilies for his coffin, was by then Italy's de facto queen of style, though behind that outward calm lay decades of private turmoil. Yet another major conflict struck in 2008, this time involving her daughter Margherita. After Gianni's passing, his estate, which included complex assets, trusts, and holdings, fell into dispute. Margherita, mother to 8 children and the only surviving child of Gianni and Marella, claimed that Marella and certain Agnelli advisors had hidden billions of euros in offshore accounts, effectively denying her rightful inheritance. It was an ugly legal battle that played out in public, tarnishing the Agnelli family's carefully curated image. Margherita painted her mother as a cold, manipulative figure who had conspired with bankers and lawyers to consolidate control. Marella refuted these accusations. The tension escalated to the point that mother and daughter became estranged, with Margherita barred from certain family gatherings. For someone like Marella, who had always prized decorum and unity, this feud must have been a bitter pill, especially after all the other losses in her life. But she held fast to her position, and the conflict never fully resolved, an enduring rift that colored her final years with sorrow. Beyond the swirl of personal tragedy, Marella continued to nurture her artistic passions. She oversaw the Pinacoteca Gianni e Marella Agnelli, an art gallery in Turin that houses parts of the family's extensive collection. There, masterpieces by Picasso, Canaletto, Renoir, and others found a home, curated in part by Marella's discerning eye. She also poured her creative energies into horticulture, especially at Villar-Perosa, where she designed gardens that married Italianate symmetry with a more romantic English-style naturalism. In 1998, she published the Agnelli Gardens at Villar-Perosa, sharing her horticultural philosophy and revealing an aspect of herself that few might have guessed in earlier decades. Behind the elegant fashion plates and party hostess was a woman who found deep solace in nature. In 2014, she released The Last Swan, a memoir that interwove her personal memories with her sense of design and photography. Though the book remained measured in tone, it offered glimpses into the shape of her journey, how she saw her role as wife, mother, and artistic soul in the midst of unimaginable wealth and scrutiny. Her final years were marked by progressive illness. Whispered rumors pointed to Parkinson's disease, though the family never issued an official statement specifying a diagnosis. She split her remaining time between Turin and Ain Kasimou in Marrakesh, a property that was both a personal sanctuary and a symbol of her broader worldview. By then, she moved with difficulty, often relying on staff for everyday tasks. The once glamorous parties at which she had sparkled were no longer in her repertoire. Indeed, the concept of the Swans itself had faded. Babe Paley died in 1978, Slim Keith passed in 1990, and by the 2000s, just a few lingered as living testaments to Capote's social galaxy. As fate would have it, she died on February 23, 2019, just days after fellow Swan Lee Radziwill, a sister of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and another of Capote's former muses. At 91, Marella had endured so much: personal heartbreak, major historical turning points, the reinvention of fiat, the swirl of social change across the mid and late 20th century. She passed away in Villa Fresco, her home in Turin, surrounded by close staff. Margherita was conspicuously absent, proof that the mother-daughter rift had never fully mended. After her death, the official funeral took place on February 25, 2019, at the Church of San Paolo in Villar-Perosa, the family stronghold. In attendance were top figures from the Fiat Empire, including John Elkann, Gianni's grandson through Margherita, who had effectively inherited the leadership role. The tension between mother and daughter had cast a long shadow, but the ceremony itself was discreet, the final act of a woman who had mastered the art of remaining elegantly controlled in public. She was laid to rest beside Gianni in the Agnelli crypt, a symbolic reunion of sorts that belied the many complexities of their marriage. The coffin, adorned with white roses, was a poignant nod to the minimalism and taste for which Marella was known. International headlines referred to her as Italy's Queen of Style, the last of the great swans, and the epitome of European grace. After her passing, the coverage in newspapers, from La Stampa in Turin to the New York Times, struggled to compress her life into neat paragraphs. They used words like icon, muse, heiress, patron, all accurate, yet incomplete. She was also a mother whose child took his own life, a spouse who weathered relentless infidelity, a daughter who lost her mother early, and a figure whose social circle both crowned her and later wounded her with betrayal. Even her once adoring daughter launched a legal crusade that cast Marella in the role of antagonist. Yet through all these trials, she rarely permitted the public to see any raw edges. That might be the final measure of her enigma, a woman who bore extraordinary burdens in a refined hush, confiding fully perhaps to no one, or at least if she confided, it was not to the tabloids or the glitzy chroniclers of high society. For watchers of 20th century history, Marella's life reflects broader themes. The evolution of European aristocracy in a modern industrial context, the interplay of personal morality within a corporate empire, the way artistry and commerce can converge in a single figure. She was not alone in that balancing act. Consider her friend group with women like Babe Paley or CZ Guest. But Marella's setting was a particularly intense crucible. Italy, with its swirling political upheavals, its boisterous tabloid culture, and the towering presence of fiat in the national psyche. She wove herself into the tapestry with a quiet but unmistakable thread. People recognized her at events by the tilt of her head, the drape of her dress, the effortless way she composed herself for a photograph. She might leave a whisper of perfume or the memory of a gentle handshake. Then she'd vanish behind the high walls of her estates, returning to a private realm that few outsiders truly knew. Marella Agnelli's story is a portrait of timeless beauty and enduring sorrow. From the halls of high society to the quiet corners of grief, she lived a life filled with privilege, pain, and poise. Though she bore tragedy with dignity, her final years were marked by estrangement and loss. Still, her legacy as a tastemaker, art collector, and cultural icon remains. What are your thoughts on Marella Agnelli's incredible journey? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the lives behind the legends. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.